I believe myself that his whole life was a search for God. Indeed, he had first taken up philosophy in hopes of finding proof of the evidence of the existence of God. Somewhere at the back of my father's mind, at the bottom of his heart, in the depths of his soul, which he did not believe he had, there was an empty space that had once been filled by God, and he never found anything else to put in it. My Father, Bertrand Russell, by Catherine Tate. Chapter 3. God's Existence. 3.1. Cause and Effect. Deduction can be of 4 types. Firstly, where a deduction is made from cause to effect. The second type of deduction is the reverse, i.e. from effect to cause. The third type stems from one effect and one cause to deduce another effect. The fourth consists of making a deduction of one inseparable from another. An example of the first, from cause to effect, would be like deducing the fact that when you see fire touch cloth, the cloth will burn. The effect is deduced from the cause. An example of the second would be like seeing some burnt cloth and knowing that the burn was caused by fire. The cause will be deduced from visible effects. An example of the third would be to see water in a cauldron that is boiling over a flame, and deducing that the water is hot. In this example, the boiling water is one effect, while the fire is the cause allowing the deduction of a second effect, namely, that the water is hot. An example of the fourth type would be like knowing that you could deduce the knowledge that someone else has. The question to be asked is which type of deduction would rational theologians utilize in order to know from the intellect whatever they can about God. Some have termed this exercise as natural theology. The answer is that they would employ only the second and fourth type of deduction mentioned above. This is very important for a person to know, since he could easily fall into a fallacy in this regard. 3.2. The Skeptical Fetters of David Hume. Traditionally, Muslim rational theologians of the Sunni Kalam method locked horns with extreme skeptics, for whom they gave the Arabic name Sufasta'iyya. Sophistry comes from the same root, and from whom blossomed 3 opposing schools, the Innadiyya, the Indiyya, and the La'adriyya. Each one of these groups had its own distinctive type of skepticism. The Innadiyya claimed that reality was imagination and thoughts. The Indiyya claimed that reality accorded with whatever the beholder made of it. If he made a particle out of it, then it would be a particle. Or if he saw it as accidental, then it would be accidental. Similarly, if he made it eternal, then it was eternal, and if he saw it as contingent, then it was contingent. The La'adriyya, on the other hand, claimed that reality could neither be affirmed nor denied, and that they, the observers, were doubtful, and doubtful about the fact that they were doubtful, and doubtful of that fact also, ad infinitum. It is not clear whether the La'adriyya were in fact from the skeptical tradition of Pyrrhonism or not, whose founder, Pyrrho of Elis, died 270 BC, refused to commit himself to any positive belief. He attempted to balance any thesis to its counter-thesis without committing himself to any. The idea of Pyrrhonism was passed down into the works of Sextus Empiricus in his Outlines of Pyrrhonism, a work said to have been rediscovered by the Anglo-Europeans in the mid-16th century. It seems that the skeptical concerns of Montague and Descartes are a direct response to this work, with Descartes identifying the defeat of skepticism as the first task of philosophy. This period marked the time, at least in Europe, of the questioning of religious truths and the establishment of the foundations of science. Skepticism not only undermines metaphysical positions, but also any scientific claims to uncover the underlying reality of matter. This is why John Locke, later to influence Hume, claimed that the study of nature yields opinion and not knowledge. To remove themselves from this conundrum, some atheists opt for a localized skepticism, rather than a universal-type skepticism, retaining skepticism for metaphysical and religious issues, while plumping for certainty in regards to science. This position can be reversed by certain theists who advocate certainty regarding religious beliefs, and doubt in regard to that which is scientifically knowable. The inherent problem with skepticism is that it forces people to treat everything as a hypothesis. Facts like the existence of the world around us should not necessarily require any particular argument. Yet even arguments put forward to support their skepticism are more doubtful than their own certainty. Kant, on the other hand, took the position that we can attain knowledge empirically, through our mind's structuring of this knowledge characterizing the world around us. Skeptics might question things as they are in themselves, the noumenal world, but not how we formulate the world by our cognitive constitution. Those things remain untouched. Dogmatic assertions are always the result of data which is elementary and a result of things like sense perception, which skeptics will dispute, neither accepting a proposed notion nor its opposite. It is said that Pyrrho, because of his skepticism, was a very calm person, and once, during a storm in which everyone on the ship panicked, Pyrrho did not. This, it was said, was because he never chose any position with certainty. It does not entail, therefore, that skeptics do not engage with practical things in life. It just means they do not have certainty regarding them. There were also skeptics associated with Plato's academia, like Arcecilius and later Carneades. The latter formed an epistemological approach to skepticism known as probabilism, a mitigated form of skepticism like that of the more contemporary Scot, David Hume. Pyrrhonism was also revived in the 1st century CE at Plato's Academy by Aeneasidemus. These academic skeptics had sharp criticisms for dogmatic philosophies such as Stoicism and Epicureanism, and yet were distinct from the extreme forms of skepticism like Pyrrhonism and solipsism. Solipsism entailed the view that only oneself existed, but, like many other philosophies and beliefs, it had a variety of forms. Academic skepticism was passed down from Carneades, via Chitomachus and Philo of Larissa, to Cicero, 43 BC, who wrote Academica, a work well known to David Hume. Before moving on to Hume's statements regarding cause and effect, we need to quickly peruse the counter-responses to ancient skepticism. It came to be asserted that the external realm that we feel, hear, and see is a reality that is established, and not a mirage in our minds or the invention of our minds, a realism that has worked for philosophy and science. Skepticism concurs with nominalism in refusing to acknowledge universals, as such a reality would undermine the realities of distinct entities, and also lead to a type of skepticism regarding the defining of realities of various things. Therefore, it is not surprising that many skeptics are nominalists. According to the Kalem scholars, the very ability to abstract and understand universals is a specific human feature, and is what differentiates humans from other animals. This was how they interpreted the earlier Hellenistic definition of a human as being a talking animal, since while human mutes are unable to talk, they can nevertheless abstract the universal. Entities, or things, are thus anything that has an actual existence, and not something that has no real existence. This is true even though we may use terms such as a thing or reality for the non-existent, as it would only be done metaphorically. Words employed for existent realities like established or real or existent or the universe are all synonyms for the same thing, albeit some philosophers may deny that synonyms are even possible, the meaning entailed by such words being self-evident. The self-evident nature of the universe means that this conclusion does not require any theoretical reasoning, while other rational theologians think otherwise. The self-evident nature of the existent realities is understood once we understand our own existence. By saying, "we exist," this statement affirms a self-evident fact, which is understood without recourse to any theoretical demonstration, with the whole of this statement comprising a part of exist. So, if the entire proposition of "I exist" is self-evident, then that would mean the part exist is also self-evident. Important when we aim to establish by such a claim that the existence of realities is self-evident. Another argument that reality exists as a self-evident understanding is the common sense understanding that existence and non-existence are not found at the same time in one entity. This intuitive assertion is understood without reflection, and as such would mean that its parts, which are existent and non-existent, are also understood without theoretical investigation. Additionally, the very concept of the existent is simple in that it is not composed of parts. If it were a composition needing a definition, then the parts that needed defining would either be existent or not. If the composition was an existent that entailed a definition of the thing by itself, this would be a rational absurdity. If, on the other hand, it was composed of nothing, then this would entail the defined, existence, being composed by its contrary, non-existence, which is impossible. If the claim is made that the assertion as to the reality of things as established is merely a tautology, a play on words, since realities and established mean the same thing, the response would simply be that both words, realities and established, are being used under varying considerations. For instance, if we understand the word human to mean simply a body, and we make the judgment that a human is an animal, that is acceptable. But if we understand the same word human to mean a talking, rational animal, and then we define a human as an animal, that would be a tautology. In both cases, the same thing is being defined, yet due to the varying considerations, the former definition is acceptable while the latter is not. The same case can be made with the statement that the external realm, what we feel, hear, and see, is a reality that is established, is not a tautology due to the differing considerations given to the words reality and established. The very fact that we conceptualize things regarding realities which exist and give judgments regarding them further reinforces the fact here that existence is self-evident. We are, for example, certain with regard to realities perceived through our senses, like the sun rising and the earth around us. These amount to necessities. We also know of necessities through various proofs, as covered in the previous chapter, like our knowledge of the existence of Venice, even if we have not seen or visited Venice. In the case of knowing Venice, our certainty has come through what is known as mass transmission. Even the statement that nothing from the realities is established would be tantamount to affirming a reality, which is the reality that no reality actually exists, which in itself would be an affirmative, assertive reality. The skeptic could respond to this by saying that the realities they are negating are in fact external material realities and not true knowledge, which is immaterial and not extramental. The response would be that the ancient skeptic denied any reality at all, whether material or mental, and argued that knowledge is physical, since thoughts occur in the brain, and chemical reactions are part of the physical realm, even though some rational theologians would say that knowledge does not externally exist. The perception of the world around us is an external source of knowledge derived from our perception, and whatever is related to us from a truthful report, such as the mass transmission that Venice exists. If perceived through non-rational senses, and the sensory perception is healthy and not distorted, it would be through our sight, hearing, tasting, touching, and smelling. And if the instrument of perception is rational, then it will be through the mind. As covered in the previous chapter, there can be a combination of ways to ascertain certainty. Hume's thoughts on knowledge state that what we do not attain through sensory perception must be from causality, cause to effect, and effect to cause. By such reasoning, the premise and conclusion are dependent on the connection between cause and effect. He reasons that as we see a constant conjunction between two events, we assume they are related. This combination of sensory experience and custom is what lends to our causal reasoning. In the previous chapter we looked at this, showing that causal reasoning came to be dubbed the empirical judgment. Hume, with his materialist and reductionist epistemology reducing all human experience to the senses, and all reasoning to scientific and mathematical calculating, concludes that science will never discover ultimate causes or a first cause, thereby ignoring immaterial human experience like love, intuition, and feeling. Causal reasoning can either be from cause to effect or effect to cause. Yet Hume only gives examples of cause to effect and not effect to cause. This would, therefore, entail that Hume may be correct when reasoning from cause to effect, that we may sometimes not predict what will occur, but when we see the effect of something, we can say with certainty what caused it. The question was raised earlier, in regard to the deductions from cause and effect, as to which type of deduction rational theologians would use in order to know about God in whatever way they could from the intellect. Some have termed this natural theology. The answer suggested was that they would employ only the second and fourth type of deduction. To refresh our memories, the second type of deduction would be from effect to cause. An example of the second would be like seeing burnt cloth and knowing that the burn was caused by fire. Such is the case whenever the effects of something are visible and the effect is deduced. It cannot be said with certainty that gray clouds will bring rain, namely, a deduction from cause to effect, but it can be stated with certainty that where there are gray clouds, it is because of rain. This is a deduction from effect to cause which does impart certainty. As we know with certainty that tracks or footsteps have been left by the paws of an animal or the feet of a human being, reasoning from effect to cause with certainty, it cannot be similarly stated with certainty that all animals and humans will leave tracks, which is reasoning from cause to effect. Like a Euclid-type reasoning, which forwards that the sum of the interior angles of a triangle being 180 degrees is not the definition that the rational theologians would give to a triangle, unlike Spinoza and others. Additional problems with Hume's skepticism stem from his nominalism, from nomina, which means names, as universal things are given names. Naam in Farsi and Urdu also means name, and the absence of abstraction which leads to more uncertainty. We experience man and his mortality, and the abstracting literally taking away, of the essentials and accidentals, like the essential nature of the organic body dying and the accidental nature of the causes of death. Thus, we know with certainty that man is mortal. Yet, for Hume, the observance of cause and effect is merely a custom, and not something to abstract from, nor learn from, or understand, but rather something we share with animals. Thus, we see events, but not the causal reality between those events. The fact that we as humans can categorize species and tell the difference between healthy foods and poisonous foods is sufficient proof of the incoherent nature of Hume's nominalism and other reasoning, whether in his enquiry or dialogues. One final point to add before moving on, even though we will return to some of Hume's interesting objections later, is Hume's linkage of cause and effect as being something purely psychological. Such a reductionism of human understanding would equate physical causes and psychological causes that we know of, and therefore undermine the science. It is like saying, he was killed by a car that ran over him, and his wife was depressed because her husband died. The former is a physical cause, and the latter is a psychological cause, that without cognizance of which, we as humans would not progress. 3.3. Russell's Teapot. It is important to mention before proceeding that Bertrand Russell is famous for his teapot analogy, an atheist favorite, which has been extended to a spaghetti monster god by others. Of course, derision and mockery are favored by new atheists, and should not be given too much attention. What Russell actually said was, many orthodox people speak as though it were the business of skeptics to disprove received dogmas, rather than of dogmatists to prove them. This is, of course, a mistake. If I were to suggest that between the Earth and Mars there is a china teapot revolving about the Sun in an elliptical orbit, nobody would be able to disprove my assertion, provided I were careful to add that the teapot is too small to be revealed even by our most powerful telescopes. But if I were to go on to say that, since my assertion cannot be disproved, it is intolerable presumption on the part of human reason to doubt it, I should rightly be thought to be talking nonsense. If, however, the existence of such a teapot were affirmed in ancient books, taught as the sacred truth every Sunday, and instilled into the minds of children at school, hesitation to believe in its existence would become a mark of eccentricity, and entitle the doubter to the attentions of the psychiatrist in an enlightened age, or of the inquisitor in an earlier time. In 1958, Russell elaborated on the analogy. I ought to call myself an agnostic, but, for all practical purposes, I am an atheist. I do not think the existence of the Christian God any more probable than the existence of the gods of Olympus or Valhalla. To take another illustration, nobody can prove that there is not between the Earth and Mars a china teapot revolving in an elliptical orbit. But nobody thinks this sufficiently likely to be taken into account in practice. I think the Christian God just as unlikely. The fallacy in this teapot analogy is the equating of God with the Olympus and Valhalla gods, and the equating of a teapot in an elliptical orbit between Earth and Mars with the existence of God. Russell, coming from a Christian background, qualifies the word God with the Christian, forestalling some acute differences between Islam and Christianity, as the latter holds the divinity of a man to be a rational possibility, while in Islam it is an impossibility. Also, the difference between a cause of the universe that is called God is totally different to a random claim of an orbiting teapot. The former has a rational basis and is not just a haphazard claim. This rational deduction of a first cause that is self-sufficient and eternal is an argument deduced from effect to cause and a host of other proofs that cumulatively make the argument for God, which is incomparable with the Teapot or any similar claims. The assimilation of God with other gods is also a false analogy, since God bears no similarity to creation in any way, and having no anthropomorphic nature that would entail contingency, and anything contingent cannot be God. So what are the essential attributes we must know regarding God, so as not to fall into fallacious arguments of spaghetti monsters, teapots, or an old man with a beard? Like atheists, Muslims reject all gods as false except God, as God is known through reason, and many of his attributes are known through reason too. Attributes known through Scripture do not contradict reason. Words that outwardly may give God any resemblance to creation are metaphors, homonyms, or other rhetoric devices utilized in eloquent language. In summary, Muslims would reject all the same gods that atheists reject except the one God. That must be understood before delving into his divine existence and nature. The rule in Islamic legal theory is, a judgment on a given thing is the subsidiary of its conception, and thus it is imperative that we have the correct concept of what is actually being debated with Muslims. If an atheist deems the debate with all theists as being on the same in terms of how they conceptualize God and his attributes, he will fall into gross error when giving judgments regarding the position of those theists. One further thing to point out regarding Russell's contention that dogmatists expect skeptics to disprove their dogma is when he said, "Many orthodox people speak as though it were the business of skeptics to disprove received dogmas, rather than of dogmatists to prove them. This is, of course, a mistake." Russell is correct here. It is not the task of skeptics to disprove any dogma, but it is the task of theists to furnish valid proofs for the existence of God. So, what is it that we are setting out to prove aside from the existence of God? Here is a summary of what Muslims actually believe regarding the divine creator. A. The 20 attributes necessarily true of God, but more specifically Allah, as the word Allah is more precise in its import, are 1. Existence, 2. Not beginning, 3. Not ending, 4. Self-subsistence, meaning not needing any place or determinant to exist, the aseity of God. 5. Dissimilarity to created things. 6. Uniqueness, meaning having no partner in his entity, attributes, or actions. 7. Omnipotent power. 8. Will. 9. Knowledge. 10. Life. 11. Hearing. 12. Sight. 13. Speech, such that he is 14. Almighty. 15. All-willing. 16. All-knowing. 17. Living. 18. All-hearing. 19. All-seeing. And 20. Speaking, through his attributes of power, will, knowledge, life, hearing, sight, and speech, not merely through his being. B. The 20 attributes necessarily impossible of Allah, 21 to 40, are the opposites of the previous 20, such as non-existence, beginning, ending, and so on. C. The only attribute merely possible of Allah, 41, is that he may create or destroy any possible thing. 3.4. Reasoning from effect to cause that God certainly exists. This proof starts from the very contingent nature of the universe. What is meant by contingency is existence after non-existence. Therefore, anything which had no prior existence, and then came into existence, would be deemed as contingent. The held position that we ourselves, everything around us, and the universe around us are all contingent is agreed upon not only by Muslims, but also Jews, Christians, and people of other creeds and philosophical positions. A proof would have to consist of certainties, i.e., to contain certain premises, for it to impart certainty. The evidence in this proof would be the universe, while the essence of this evidence would be the contingent nature of the universe, and the direction this evidence leads to is the neediness of the universe to an instantiating cause that brought it into existence, while the indication of this evidence would be the impossibility of the universe coming into existence without an instantiating cause. The contingent nature of the universe is understood from its very observance, whether we observe it in the heavens or on the earth. We see how it differs in nature in all aspects, whether we see all parts of the world or not. We know that the material realm consists of bodies that fill a void. Whether that void is made up of tangible things like trees, rocks, and humans, or intangible things like atoms, quarks, and light, all of these have attributes that are contingent, accidental in their nature, and being renewed continuously until that solid body perishes. The meaning of how contingents become established within bodies comes from the fact that their placement is continuous with that of those solid bodies. Their very existence follows that of the solid bodies that they are accidental to, not existing separately nor independent of those solid bodies. The word accidental would be preferable to the word attribute, since the word accidental always implies contingency, while the word attribute does not. Movement, stillness, visible things like colors, things understood, like life, the five senses and their opposites, are all intelligible, irrefutable proofs of the contingent nature of the universe, as all these things come into existence after non-existence. At the very least, everything in the universe, and indeed the universe itself, is either moving or still. Since movement and stillness are both contingent, that would mean that they came into existence after non-existence. If someone insisted that the universe was eternal or that matter was eternal, then it would entail one of three things. Firstly, either the universe or matter had been moving for eternity, or, secondly, that it was still for eternity, or, thirdly, that it was neither moving or still for eternity. All three suppositions are false. The third proposal of universe and matter neither moving nor still is simply wrong because all matter always fills a void, and when it fills a void, it is either moving or is still. This is understood by the eye of the mind. As for the impossibility of the material universe being eternally still, if it were such, then it would not accept movement from place to place at all, because stillness in this case would be eternal without beginning, and without having been preceded by non-existence, since the eternal does not accept non-existence. For an eternally still universe to suddenly move would mean that stillness is not actually eternal as it no longer exists. If stillness accepts perishing, then for its existence it needs a specifier, as all that is possible can be either existent or non-existent, the specifier coming to tip the scale and bring that possible event into existence ex nihilo. By being specified or willed into existence would mean that stillness is a contingent. The proof of the perishing nature of stillness is in our observance of it in the known universe when we see or can rationalize and abstract that still things can start moving, marking that stillness has perished in that thing once it has started moving. The first proposal of an eternally moving material universe is also impossible by the same reasoning, An eternally moving material universe cannot become still, and if it did, that would mean it was not eternal but contingent. That is because something that comes to an end, in this case movement, would be dependent on something else to determine its existence, and it would not be self-sufficient. And anything which is not self-sufficient would have to have been preceded by non-existence. There is an additional caveat to the notion of an eternally moving material universe, or a motionless material universe, and that is that movement of solid bodies, meaning here anything that fills a void, whether a rock or light, moves from place to place. That would mean that when the moving material filled one void, it would stop at that void, even momentarily, and then move on to the next void, which would entail renewal at every stage of its movement, clearly implying its contingent nature. Therefore, an eternally moving material universe could not in fact be eternal. 3.5. 7 Principles. From the above, it becomes clear that the entire universe is contingent in nature, that it came into existence after non-existence, that it was not there and then was there. Likewise, it cannot be deemed rational that any one part of the material universe be eternal, because it is absolutely certain that every part of the universe is either still or moving, and it has already been rationally demonstrated that you cannot have a material universe with eternal movement or stillness. This entire proof is built upon 7 foundations or principles, which are 1. Establishing something additional existing to the solids. 2. Invalidating the view that this addition is self-established. 3. Invalidating that this addition transfers. 4. Invalidating that it conceals and then reappears. 5. The impossibility of the eternal perishing. 6. Establishing that material bodies never separate from those additions. 7. Establishing the impossibility of contingents that have no first. Imam as-Sanusi famously said that the 7 gates of hell are shut for the one who knows these 7 principles. 3.6. The summary of proof for these 7 principles. The first principle, that of an additional existent to the material universe and its components, is self-explanatory, as every rational being feels additional things to his own material body, and the observation of the accidents. The second principle, that those accidents which are additional to the material universe are not self-established, meaning it is impossible to have a characteristic without the host being described. You cannot have movement without the mover. The third principle is that this accidental cannot transfer from one material thing to another, like stillness of one body moving into another body, as that would mean that the accident during the process of transference would be independent without a host, even if momentarily. However, it has already been substantiated that the accidental cannot exist independently as a characteristic. The fourth principle is that the accidental cannot be concealed and then reappear. This would mean that while an object is moving, there is no concealed stillness, and while it is still, there is no concealed movement. When the materials move, that is a new accidental, and the previous accidental perishes. Otherwise, this would mean 2 contradictory accidentals are found in one host, and that is absurd. The fifth principle is that the eternal does not accept perishing. If it did perish, it would mean that it is only possible and not necessary, and possibilities are contingent. The sixth principle is that bodies and the material universe are never void of any accidental, and that is established by the obvious fact that everything is either stationary or moving, both of which are contingents. The seventh principle is that contingents with no first cannot exist. because each component and individual of the everlasting chain of contingents would have a beginning. This individual beginning within the supposed endless chain would mean that the entire chain has a beginning from eternity. For if we had in the external realm a continuous chain of material contingents, eternally from the past up to the present, the sum total of those contingents would need an initiator, because the entire chain is possible, which means its non-existence and existence are within the realm of possibilities that require an initiator to bring it into existence. This entire chain of eternal contingents would be made of individuals, which would mean it is compounded, but since the compounded is always in need of its components, this neediness would negate a necessary existence. The cause of the infinite succession of contingent events cannot be itself and neither a part of itself, because of the rational impossibility of a thing being the cause of itself, and the impossibility of a thing preceding its own existence. If a part of the sequence is a cause for the entire sequence, it would mean that it has caused itself and the rest of the sequence. This is because that part is also a part of the entire sequence. If we do not make that part a cause for itself and the entire sequence, it would result in that part requiring a cause. If we suppose that A has caused X, Y, and Z, and then because of A's contingent nature, it would also require a cause, which would be any one of X, Y, and Z, which have already been stated as being caused by A, and that is impossible also. Therefore, the cause of the entire sequence will be out of the sequence, and would be necessary and not possible in its nature, because all things are either possible, impossible, or necessary. The possible here is that the contingents and their existence as an eternal sequence have been demonstrated as being impossible, while the second option, that of being rationally impossible, is not fit as to the cause of the sequence, since the only solution would be one which is absolutely necessary. 3.7. The proof by way of tallying or application. Burhān al-Taṭbīq. This thought experiment would work in the following way. If we suppose a sequence that goes back infinitely from where it reaches us, the last portion of this sequence which reaches us is not the cause of the sequence as it is right at the end. We will call that point Z. The remaining sequence will consist of effects and causes or an infinite number of events. The point after Z we will call Y. Let us suppose another sequence from point Y back to infinity, which has an infinite number of contingents. We will name the first sequence as 1 and the second sequence as 2. Sequence 1 finishes at point Z and sequence 2 finishes at point Y. However, both sequences go back to infinity. Then what we do is tally both sequences. Every point in sequence 1 is tallied with every point in sequence 2 ad infinitum. Of course, if someone objects that this cannot be done physically, the response would simply be that it is a mental exercise, and it can be done by way of summary through mental conceptualization. Once every point of sequence 1 has been tallied with sequence 2, this would mean that the increased is equal to the decreased here being sequence 2. Some might say that an increase or decrease are unique qualities of that something which ends, but it can be responded to by saying that this increase and decrease is from one end, and not at both ends of the sequence. The increase in our experiment is only by point Z. If it was supposed that the increased, sequence 1, was equal to the decreased, which is sequence 2, it would be validating the rationally impossible, since we know that the whole is always greater than the part. Some could claim that the tallying of two sequences and their points is not necessarily accomplished, because of the near equal size of the two sequences, but rather because both of them are endless. The response would be that we definitely know that both sequences are either equal or different in size, and that the sequence with less numbers will always finish first, even if each point is not tallied, and in this case we have sequence 2 finishing before sequence 1. When something is found in sequence 1, in this case Z, which does not have anything to be tallied within sequence 2, it would mean that sequence 2 has finished. The fact that sequence 2 finishes means that it is not eternal, but more importantly it would mean that sequence 1 also comes to an end, because sequence 1 has a limited increase to sequence 2, and that limited increase is the point Z. So, it has been decisively proven that sequence 2 is not eternal, and neither is sequence 1, as it only increases upon sequence 2 by Z. This would also mean that contingencies that are increasing can never be deemed as eternal, and eternal here means that which has no beginning and no end. 3.8. Cantor's set theory. At this juncture, someone may contest that if this proof is valid, then all transfinite numbers come to an end. The response to this would be that this tallying relates to those things which have an actual existence, as opposed to that purely from the imagination. At the very minimum, the first sequence should have a real existence. In our thought experiment, this would be the world around us with all its events, accidentals, and contingencies. Relative things, for instance, have no real external existence. This is why this proof cannot be contradicted with numbers. If someone were to say that we have sequence A and sequence B, and that sequence A starts with number 1 upwards to infinity, as numbers do not stop, while sequence B starts from number 2 upwards to infinity also. However, when we tally sequence A with sequence B, we can tally tens with 1, or tens with hundreds, or hundreds with thousands. This objection would not disprove the proof, because what is meant by the proof of tallying is real existence, as opposed to imagination. Additionally, what is meant by numbers never ending is that you can continuously add in the mind and then multiply that number by the number of trees, stars, and sand grains, and then keep adding on to that number conceptually. But the eternal number will never have existence externally, and neither could you actually comprehend it in the mind. As for what Cantor termed as sets, they are constructs of the mind that do not actually exist extramentally. Like transfinite numbers cannot have an actual infinite existence, so too sets with infinite cardinality cannot have an actual existence, because an infinite number of tasks can never be completed. A set also comprises of an infinity of numbers, which do not actually exist but are imagined, with infinite numbers only a potentiality. A final point is that anything that has a beginning, as with the number 1, it is the beginning of a set of real numbers, and added to infinitely cannot be deemed as infinite, as that which has a start and then added to cannot be deemed as eternal in the way we ascribe to God. In this way, the everlasting nature of paradise means that paradise had a start, and is sustained by God to exist forever. This would mean that paradise is a contingent creation that will be sustained infinitely, but cannot in any way be equated with God's aseity and eternal nature, as he has no beginning and no end, and is not sustained by another. 3.9. The absurdity of circular reasoning and continuous regression. By knowing two important rational impossibilities, Many of the absurd claims made by atheists can be avoided. The first rational impossibility is circular reasoning, dawr, and the second is the continuous regression, tasalsul, both of which are invalid. A common question asked is that if God was the uncaused causer, what brought God into existence? If God did have a cause, it would mean that he is contingent also, which leads to the problem of continuous regression, as well as what was stated earlier regarding contingents with no first cause. This is why it cannot be said that the universe explains itself. Continuous regression means that if we say that the universe is contingent, but was caused by, for instance, an alien life form, the question would arise as to what caused the alien life form. The answer might well be another alien life form did. However, the same question would arise again relating to the cause of that other alien life form. If the answer was again another alien life form, this would lead to a continuous regression of contingents. This is an impossibility since contingents by their very nature are instantiated ex nihilo, and therefore depend on an ultimate cause that is self-sufficient, without beginning, and that bears no resemblance to contingent beings in any way whatsoever. Circular reasoning is also a rational impossibility. If it were proposed that A caused B and B also caused A, we would observe that the existence of A is dependent on B, and likewise the existence of B is dependent on A. This should not be confused with circular conceptual concepts like saying, Tom is father to John, and John is son to Tom. Without Tom, John would not be a son, and without John, Tom would not be a father. The type of circular reasoning that is deemed impossible is that which relates to causation or anything else that is rationally impossible. The logical absurdity in this reasoning is apparent, as it would be necessary that both entities A and B precede each other. A contrasting example would be a heavy ball resting on a pillow that causes a depression in the pillow and the ball to sink down, with both the depression and the sinking existing simultaneously, or a key in the hand of a person that turns simultaneously with the hand when opening or locking a door. Irrational circular reasoning refers to causation and instantiation. If it were true, it would mean that both A and B precede one another and come into existence after one another. Dewr, or circularity, can be considered a type of petitio principii, a fallacy in which a conclusion is taken for granted in the premises, begging the question. An example of such rational absurdities in popular science would be the statement made by Stephen Hawking and Leonard Mlodinow in The Grand Design. Because there is a law of gravity, the universe can and will create itself out of nothing. This is circular reasoning, because a law of nature depends for its own existence on the prior existence of the nature and material it describes. How can gravity, a law of nature, exist prior to the very inception of the universe? They write elsewhere in the same book, M-theory predicts that a great many universes were created out of nothing. Their creation does not require the intervention of some supernatural being or God. Rather, these multiple universes arise naturally from physical law. Of course, New Atheism swallows this hook, line, and sinker, even though it just remains merely theoretical and not a rational or empirical fact, but simply because it denies God. If physical law gave these universes existence, this again would lead to circular reasoning. How can we have physical law prior to the order of nature? 3.10. What the cause of the universe entails. It cannot be understood by the mind that this contingent and needy universe, which is possible, comes out of prior non-existence, as both its non-existence and existence were possible, without a doer who specifies its existence with power and will. Aside from the deduction from effect to cause, there is the proof from possibility which can be stated in the following syllogism. Premise 1. The universe exists after it had not existed. Premise 2. Every existent after prior non-existence has an originator that brings it into existence. Conclusion. Therefore, the universe had an originator that brought it into existence. It has already been demonstrated that the universe is contingent, because of its essential nature in having accidents which are themselves contingent, since nothing in the universe is free from accidents and contingents like movement and stillness. Because of this intrinsic link, it would mean that the very material of the universe is contingent, as it cannot come into existence prior to its own essential nature. As for every contingent requiring an originator, that would be due to the impossibility of something originating itself, and the fact that both its existence and non-existence would be equal in terms of probability, and for the non-existent to bring about its own existence is also a rational impossibility. Therefore, it would require something external and non-contingent to bring it into existence. Roger Penrose, another physicist who has written popular works on physics, writes in his book, The Emperor's New Mind, the chance of the existence of the universe is 1 in 10 to the power of 123. This would render the number too large to be written down in full, even if all the protons in the entire universe were used to write a digit on. The earlier syllogism presented was by coupling or in combination, which means that both premises, the minor, sughra, and major, kubra premises, have been coupled together with a common term, al-had al-awsat, even though the other premises are different. What becomes necessitated by this combination is a third premise composed of two different terms as subject and predicate. A way of presenting the argument differently is with the following syllogistic reasoning. Premise 1. If the creator of the universe did not exist by necessity, there would be no universe in existence. Premise 2. However, the universe does exist. Conclusion. Therefore, a creator is necessarily existent. The reasoning behind this is that the other two options for the creator would be that he is impossible or possible. If he were impossible, then the contingent possible universe would not exist. But it does exist and therefore has a cause. If that cause was just possible, it would mean that he would also have a cause, and that would lead to circular reasoning or continuous regression, which would entail our non-existence. But we do exist, and our non-existence with existence is an impossible paradox. Therefore, the cause of the universe exists by necessity, and the very existence of the universe does not combine with the impossibility of the cause or the possibility of the cause, the only rational combination with the necessary existence of the cause. The significations in these proofs lies in both the possible nature of the universe and the contingent nature of the universe. The possible nature signifies the first necessary eternal cause, because the possible is specified into existence by a specifier, since otherwise it would remain in non-existence, because anything coming into existence without a specifier is an impossibility. Tarjih bil al-murajih. The contingent nature of the universe also signifies its originator, as has already been demonstrated. The universe would thus mean anything other than the creator, signifying to the divine cause in many ways. The same could also be understood in how things around us are actualized, specified, and finely tuned. For example, your very own existence as a sentient being attests that after non-existence, you now clearly exist. It was not you who brought yourself into existence, but something did. It would have been totally impossible for you to have created yourself, for that would have entailed that you could create other things which are less than yourself, and also that your creation preceded your very existence. The greatest myth of our time is the assigning of attributes affirmed for God to nature. The inherent features and qualities of the physical world around us are truly natural, but nature has been deified. Children are not taught to speak, yet they learn how to speak. Similarly, they are not taught to walk, yet they learn to walk. All the while, the environment triggers what is found innately within us. Science observes the functions of our human nature, including the genes and DNA. Scientific research goes on to describe the function of such things, like the function of DNA being passed on as a chemical structure to another chemical structure. Yet to ascribe a divine attribute to such a function, that the genes created our body and soul, is not science at all, rather just filling the gaps, as theism is typically accused of doing, and myth-making that blurs the line between science and belief. The way things stand and the way we are, we could have had any number of various traits from height, color, intelligence, strength, and so forth, all traits equal in their possibilities. We are actually specified with things that we have no choice over, with many of us ascribing those traits, the physical makeup of ourselves and the world around us and its description, to nature, and thus the arena of science. The error lies in ascribing such attributes to nature, not actually found in nature or scientifically as in factually proven. These attributes ascribed to nature are like the attributes of power and will as well as knowledge, which is more implicit in popular atheist discourse. What is it that actually allots us with certain traits and attributes, and later stops us growing at a certain age along with so many other biological facts? It cannot be a chemical process, as that is just a description of what is occurring. The common answer to this deep question is nature. But that is in fact circular reasoning, as nature is only an actual description of the physical world around us, including ourselves, and not the actualizing force of what determines things to be what they are. If someone were to use a scientific description of what water is, by stating it is the chemical combination of H2O, it would still not tell us what actually determined water to be the way it is, since hydrogen and oxygen alone do not always necessarily make water. There is the function of water in the water cycle, in the rivers and oceans, the specificity and actualization of such things. This reasoning can be placed in a syllogism which would read something like, Premise 1. One's very being has been specified with certain things from a host of numerous other possibilities. Premise 2. Anything which is specified would mean the one who specified it has a will. Conclusion. The conclusion would be that the one who subjects your very being to those specifics is the doer of his choice. 3.11. A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss. This book was deemed groundbreaking for New Atheism, for it did for physics what Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species did for atheism in biology. New Atheism claims that unlike organized theism or religion, it has no clergy and no blind conformity amongst its congregation, yet their adherents believe that a universe could come into existence from nothing and still deem it rational and science, simply because a physicist said so. They little question the validity of such claims. If, however, they understood the science behind such claims, they would know that it is not as literal as it is made out to be. It seems that Darwinism and Krauss's universe from nothing have become dogmas. Anyone who questions the fact that they make little sense or that there is very little evidence, in Darwin's implied origins of Homo sapiens at least, is deemed as questioning that which is self-evident, with denial or skepticism of such theories as naive. New atheism thus falls into that which it accuses religion of, namely, blind conformity, bias confirmation, and inquisitions for the disbeliever. Today, in the Western world, the inquisitions are seldom violent or represented by concentration camps and forceful conversions as they were in communist Russia, or as they are for Uyghur Muslims in China today, but rather anyone skeptical towards new atheism or who questions its dogmatic tenets must face vitriol, diatribe, and insult. Richard Dawkins writes, "Even the last remaining trump card of the theologian, 'Why is there something rather than nothing?' shrivels up before your eyes as you read these pages. If On the Origin of Species was biology's deadliest blow to supernaturalism, we may come to see a universe from nothing as the equivalent from cosmology. The title means exactly what it says, and what it says is devastating. But does it mean exactly what it says on the cover? Prima facie, nothing means exactly that. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. As rational theologians point out, the non-existent is not a thing. The book would be more interesting if it were actual genuine nothingness, since genuine nothingness implies no special requirements for the stated nothing. So, does Krauss deliver that knockout blow as Richard Dawkins hoped he would? The answer is no. In the end, it is concluded that laws of physics do not come from nothing. The question is restacked for later by invoking a multiverse, and wherein all universes with their own laws arise within it. By leaving the origins of the multiverse out, Krauss brings us back to the initial problem, namely, where do the laws of quantum mechanics themselves are supposed to have come from? He writes, "I have no idea if this notion can be usefully dispensed with, or at least I don't know of any productive work in this regard." This is an admission made a few pages before the end of the book. Laws in and of themselves are regarded as descriptions of the underlying materials of the universe, whether those considered are as electromagnetic fields or material particles. Relativistic quantum field theories do not count material particles as the elemental physical stuff of the world, but as arrangements within the field. These field arrangements can correspond to any number of particles, but sometimes they correspond to there being no particles at all, what are described as vacuum states, essentially deemed as unstable. This is the nothing indicated by Krauss, who differentiates this nothing, the vacuum states, from the nothing discussed in philosophy and rational theology. So, in summary, what Krauss is describing as nothing is in fact a quantum vacuum. This nothing has various requirements like empty space and a law of quantum gravity, plus he invokes a multiverse at the end. In other words, those quantum fluctuations redefine what nothing is. Added to that, any scientific theory, in order to have its equations working, would have to have some input. Equations which have the same dimensions are known to be dimensionally correct, and equations within any scientific theory must be dimensionally correct. Otherwise, there is an error in the equation. If absolutely nothing was being placed in these equations, then those equations would not work. For example, anything multiplied by 0 is 0. Finally, if we say that the universe comes from absolutely nothing and God is nothing, then the universe comes from God. But if we say that the nothing here is not absolutely nothing, but is the vacuum so described, then it is still something, and we go back to the argument on contingency and possibility. Chapter 9 of Krauss's book is entitled, Nothing is Something, not exactly what you would have thought from the title of the book, or from Dawkins' panegyric and promise that the title means exactly what it says. Chapter 10 is then fittingly named, Nothing is Unstable. 3.12 Afterthoughts and Various Considerations. The atheist worldview seems to have no absolute truths, except those rooted in material fact or what are deemed as testable empirical truths, with therefore everything else becoming subjective. This has a knock-on effect with other things, not least the binding fabric of a society. The binding fabric of society could never be atheism, as atheism is the corrosive factor that leads to the fragmenting of any civilization. Nihilism and atheism, especially new atheism, together, seem to go concomitantly towards a soulless, spiritually empty, and aimless life, unless the only aim is to verbally brawl with religious people. Atheism is the ultimate assault on human reasoning and on the human soul and mind, under the guise of intelligence and scientific pretensions. Atheism attacks the very basic principles which are common sense, yet at the same time claiming itself to be the acme of intelligence. First principles are of immense importance to understand why, ultimately, new atheism undermines the mind, even though this is usually covered up in one of two ways or a combination of both. The first is by finding fallacious beliefs of superstitious people and conflating them with the underlying basis of theism. This would be equivalent to finding a religious practice or a superstitious belief that some may find odious, and using the repulsive nature of that belief or practice to undermine the very belief in God. The human mind alone, without recourse to any organized religion, could accept an ultimately necessary cause of the universe. New atheism cannot, because it has an axe to grind with what is termed as organized religion. The term organized religion is problematic for the new atheist because of what he sees of its bloody history, even though communism, an atheist ideology, far outdid religion in terms of bloody violence in less than a century. A further problem with organized religion is its many laws and restrictions that inhibit the carnal desires. The second method by which atheism masks its assault and denigration of human reasoning is by utilizing unfamiliar terms to a lay audience, or by obfuscating its arguments. 3.13 Occam's Razor. An example of assault on reason is the rejection of common sense principles, or what we would term as first principles. Atheists tend to reject many common sense first principles. Principles like the law of causality, the principle of sufficient reason, the law of the excluded middle, and the law of non-contradiction. And there is Occam's razor, which is pertinent to mention at this point. It is also known as the principle of parsimony. Even though this principle was founded by Aristotle, it became associated with Occam, died 1342 CE, because of the style of his philosophy. Occam defended nominalism, while condemning the doctrine of the universal as the worst error in philosophy. The principle of parsimony would be a simplification in theory construction. Simpler explanations are generally better than more complex ones. 3.14 The principle of sufficient reason. This principle Leibniz believed was fundamental for all reasoning. Leibniz states, "There can be found no fact that is true or existent, or any true proposition, without there being a sufficient reason for its being so and not otherwise, although we cannot know those reasons in most cases." So, the principle, in short, is nothing exists without a reason. This principle is intuitive and compelling. Later, Schopenhauer distinguished 4 explanatory applications of the same principle. one of them relating specifically to explaining change in the physical world. 3.15. The Fallacy of Composition. This fallacy exists because some inferences from parts to whole or whole to parts are wrong. Russell and Hume indicated this with regard to the cosmological argument, by stating that parts of the universe are contingent, and concluding that the universe is contingent, is to commit the fallacy of composition. An example of the fallacy is like saying, "This team comprises of strong athletes, and therefore the team is strong." Or the opposite, from the whole to the part, known as the fallacy of division, is like saying, "This rope is strong, and therefore every strand is strong." For Russell, this fallacy is committed when it is suggested that everything in the universe is contingent, and therefore the universe is contingent. The response to this is that it is not necessary to draw that conclusion from the part alone, as we know intuitively that the universe is either moving or still, and both movement and stillness are contingents. Also, the universe is a composite, and every composite is dependent on its compositions and therefore has a dependent existence, which is the very meaning of contingency. For Russell, the claim that everything in the universe is contingent could be made, but still the universe as a whole is necessary. This would fly in the face of Big Bang cosmology, by which it is claimed that the universe started 13.74 billion years ago, and anything that has come into existence after non-existence is our definition of contingency. The fact that the universe is observably expanding and expansion is a characteristic of a contingent, therefore also shows the universe is contingent. The fallacy of composition can apply to fallacious arguments, but not to arguments that are correct. An example of a fallacious argument would be, "This airplane is made of small bits of metal, therefore the airplane is small." But a correct argument could be, "This airplane is made from metal, therefore the airplane is metal." To say, "The universe is composed of contingents, therefore the universe is contingent," would be a correct argument, therefore, without the fallacy of composition. David Hume claims that a being cannot be necessary, since such a claim cannot be substantiated through sensory experience, as all statements relating to existence are relations of ideas, synthetic in Kantian terms. Hume claims the statement relating to God's necessary existence can never be logically true or matter of fact, analytical in Kantian terms. However, this is a gross misunderstanding of what type of claim is being made regarding the essence of God, as it relates to the metaphysical necessity of God. This is when an existence of a metaphysical being is accepted, and then something is stated regarding the properties of its nature to make a distinction from accidental properties. 3.16. A caused universe and the causal principle. It is epistemically necessary and self-evident that everything that is contingent, meaning that which did not exist prior to its coming into existence, has a cause and is intuitively known. The denial of this principle is held to be an assault on reason and the human mind. Immanuel Kant describes the causal necessity as a bastard of the imagination impregnated by experience. Kant, Hume, and others held that it has no legitimate application in the world. Cause, according to Hume, is one object followed by another. Hume defines a cause as an object followed by another, where all the objects similar to the first are followed by objects similar to the second. This necessity of cause and effect is termed as hypothetical or conditional necessity. So, according to such empiricists, the laws of nature are not necessary truths. This is interesting, as that is what is termed a miracle in Islamic theology, which, by definition, is a violation of the norm, which then falls into the empirical or habitual judgments discussed in the previous chapter on epistemology. However, if we were to just accept the universe as brute fact, as Russell states, then this would impede scientific research, as people would stop there without further investigation into the laws that govern the universe, even though we say that those laws are governed by the necessary eternal cause of the universe. 3.17. The Anthropic Principle and the Teleological Argument. The Anthropic Principle is one where the universe has certain features, by dint of the fact that human observers exist to observe with their eyes and minds. The weak Anthropic Principle in cosmology is that the universe must have properties necessary for the existence of observers or universes that allow cognitive beings. The strong Anthropic Principle asserts, controversially, that the various physical constants are explained by the essentiality of human existence. This principle exposes how improbable the coincidence of human life actually is, yet anthropic principles are cited as an alternative to the argument from design. A teleological argument is from the Greek root telos, meaning perfection, goal, and purpose. Not all teleological arguments presuppose intelligent design, and may be justified through an analysis of the function of what is being observed by an etiological account. This is found in biology and economics, for instance. It should be stated here that functional analysis and etiological study do not contradict the method of Islam and is in fact something the Quran encourages. However, the teleological arguments used by theists do infer the presence of a grand creator and designer of the universe. Philosophers typically divided in two camps, the tender and the tough-minded. So too in science there is a distinction between scientists who, although may observe the same data, carry out the same experiments, and draw the same conclusion, yet take different implications regarding the ramifications of that science. The fine-tuning and intelligibility of the cosmos, beauty, love, consciousness, the simplicity of mathematics, all prove the existence of God. As evil is oft cited by atheists to disprove God, theists can cite all the above as well as ethics, morality, justice, truth, and many more things. This might be called a cumulative argument for God. Even if not convinced by any one argument, the entire discussion, if analyzed holistically, amounts to a cumulative argument and certainty that there is indeed a God. 3.18. God of the Gaps. When scientists study physical matter, from ourselves to all our surroundings, they uncover its function, attempting to explain and understand its cause and reason. When science cannot proceed, at least momentarily, or reaches its limits with many questions remaining unanswered, filling those unanswered questions by simply referring to God is referred to as God of the Gaps. As soon as those gaps are bridged, then the role of God is diminished, as functionality and causality become more scientifically evident. Theists who are not scientists or have not studied science will always ascribe all phenomena to God, but not from a scientific standpoint. Doing this in reverse, so to speak, as a scientific method would be fallacious. If there are scientific questions that have not been answered, then resorting to filling the gaps via God as a scientific hypothesis or explanation is deeply flawed and misleading. Such problems stem from conflating science with rational theism, or viewing rational theism as a form of scientific theory, and, not least, the clear misunderstanding of what is meant by saying God caused everything, and what is meant by scientific research. Limiting all truth to science is also fallacious. Science is the observation of regularities and knowing the functionality of the material world, by experimentation and accepting the falsifiability of any proposed theory. Rational theology only points out what everything signifies in the deeper spiritual and conscious sense, and it is not proposed as a scientific theory. Rational theology is an a posteriori deductive argument from signification of everything observed and felt. This is why science flourished in many centuries of early Islamic civilization alongside the development of the Kalam methodology, as the two do not clash. God's existence may not be evident for atheists in asteroids and quantum physics, but for the theist, everything in the universe signifies God and is a manifestation of God's divine attributes and actions. It is not a scientific hypothesis. A finely tuned universe signifies divine knowledge, will, power, and divine existence. When studying a finely tuned universe or finding gaps in scientific explanations, it would be wrong to attempt to explain those gaps by conflating God with a scientific theory. A finely tuned universe would entail design, but not a scientific theory. The human consciousness is cognizant that pure mathematics applies in the universe, and physical elements behave in periodic regularity, and that what is observed is quantifiable via mathematical formulae as to how everything interacts. When a human being observes this, is he arrogant and conceited enough to say this signifies a grand design? When we read about recent scientific discoveries and those in prior times observing the uniformity of everything in the known world, it signifies the intricate fine-tuning that permits and nurtures life. Atheists will typically appeal to imperfections in its design, and the perishing nature of the universe, as well as the existence of evil and odious entities. But finer tuning and the teleological argument rightly confirm that the universe to occur by chance is mathematically and rationally impossible. Another consideration is that the overwhelming mass of the universe is not actually biofriendly, which would mean that planet Earth, and if there were any other places with life, are almost unique, further limiting the possibility of mere chance. In Just Six Numbers, Sir Martin Rees elaborates on 6 numbers without which life would not be possible. Like Paul Davies and other learned physicists writing popular works on the universe, Sir Martin is not advocating theism, but science. From these 6 numbers, 2 of them relate to the basic forces, 2 fix the size and overall texture of our universe and determine whether it will continue forever, and 2 more fix the properties of space itself. The first number deemed so crucial to life is huge, and equal to 1 times 10 to the power of 12. The number measures the strength of the electrical force that holds atoms together, divided by the force of gravity between them. If it were any smaller, only a short-lived miniature universe could exist. No creatures could grow larger than insects, and there would be no time for biological evolution. The second number is 0.007, and defines how firmly atomic nuclei bond together, and how all the atoms on Earth were made. Its value controls the power from the sun and, more sensitively, how stars transmute hydrogen into all the elements in the periodic table. Carbon and oxygen are common, while gold and uranium are rare, because of what happens in the stars. If this number were 0.006 or 0.008, then we could not exist. The third number, omega, measures the amount of material in our universe. While galaxies diffuse gas and dark matter, omega tells us of the relative importance of gravity and expansion in the universe. If this ratio was too high relative to a particular critical value, then the universe would have collapsed long ago. Had it been too low, no galaxies or stars would have been formed. The initial expansion speed seems to have been finely tuned. The fourth number, lambda, was, Rees states, the biggest scientific news of 1998. An unsuspected new force, a cosmic anti-gravity, controls the expansion of our universe. Even though it has no discernible effect on a scale of less than 1 billion light-years, it is destined to become ever more dominant over gravity and other forces as our universe becomes ever darker and emptier. Fortunately for us, and very surprisingly to theorists, lambda is very small. Otherwise, its effect would have stopped galaxies and stopped stars from forming, and cosmic evolution would have been stifled before it could even begin. The fifth number is Q, the seed for all cosmic structures, stars, galaxies, and clusters of galaxies that were all imprinted in the Big Bang. The fabric of our universe depends on this number Q, which represents the ratio of two fundamental energies and is roughly 1/100,000th in value. If Q were even smaller, the universe would be inert and structureless, and conversely, if Q were even larger, the universe would be a violent place in which no stars or solar systems could survive, one dominated by vast black holes. The sixth crucial number has been known for centuries, although is now viewed from a new perspective. It is the number of spatial dimensions in our world. D equals to 3. Life would not exist if D were 2 or 4, with time being a fourth dimension distinctively different from the others. Sir Martin Rees writes, "These 6 numbers constitute a recipe for the universe. Moreover, the outcome is sensitive to their values. If any one of them were to become untuned, there would be no stars and no life. Is this tuning a coincidence? Or is it the providence of a divine creator? I take the view that it is neither." Scientific data and research should never be opposed by religion, and certainly is not opposed by the Kalam methodology, just as the certainty of undisputable, unequivocal tenets of Islam cannot be contradicted by factual science. At least that is the proposition that the rational theology of the Kalam scholars claim, and which is being supported here. What scientific fact signifies, however, is altogether of a different matter. It is more like the perfect conjecture of the moon with the sun during an eclipse, something which could never happen if the moon was further from, or indeed closer to, the earth. Scientific data informs both the theist and the atheist. The theist will internally see the signs of God. The atheist will see chance and coincidence. Yet both groups will agree to the science. 3.19. Alien of the Gaps. Francis Crick, who with James Watson discovered the structure of DNA, proposed in Life Itself, Its Origin and Nature, a theory known as panspermia. Pan/pos in Greek means all, and sperm meaning seed. Crick, to avoid explaining how life emanated from lifeless chemicals, proposed panspermia. Crick entertained the idea that some form of primordial life was shipped to the Earth billions of years ago in spaceships by supposedly more evolved and advanced alien beings. This was the conclusion of an atheist and renowned scientist, after the double helix DNA structure was shown to be incompatible with the origin of life from any earthly cause. Life could not evolve from lifeless chemicals under any condition on Earth, so something other than God was needed, and what better idea than that of aliens? If a religious person reasoned in the same manner regarding such things, it would be deemed superstition. Crick's reasoning is accepted solely through his scientific credibility, despite the proposition amounting to the fallacy of appeal to authority, notwithstanding that the theory is not completely untestable. It is ironic that such a famous Nobel scientist could interpret scientific facts and data to come up with another theory to fit his own worldview, exactly what theists are disparaged for doing. Thus, it is essential to distinguish between scientific fact, empirical or testable data that has never been falsified, and the inferences made from it. The former is unbiased and not tainted by religion or atheism, while the latter is an interpretation of the facts. Incidentally, Richard Dawkins is on record for stating that belief that an alien life form placed life on Earth is a possibility difficult to disprove. In a response to a question regarding intelligent design during an interview, Dawkins said, "It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time somewhere in the universe an earlier civilization evolved, by probably some kind of Darwinian means, to a very high level of technology, and designed a form of life they seeded into perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility, and an intriguing possibility, and I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of our chemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer, and that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe." Such reasoning does not actually answer the puzzle of creation. It just regresses the question to an earlier alien life form, and is certainly not science, merely a standard example of continuous regress. If a theist was to reason in such a manner, they would be ridiculed by Dawkins and his acolytes. Is the claim for a finely tuned universe, fit for life, necessarily anthropocentric? If it is, then this would mean, as the late Christopher Hitchens claimed, that religion is arrogance and hubris, not to mention the fact that God waited millions of years to send the revelation for the salvation of humanity. The Muslim response would be, with regard to the claim that the universe is anthropocentric, the lines in the Quran which clearly say, "Assuredly the creation of the heavens and the earth is greater than the creation of mankind, but most of mankind know not." Quran 40:57. With regard to salvation, then the Quran states, "Whoever chooses to be guided, it is only for their own good, and whoever chooses to stray, it is only their own loss. No soul burdened with sin will bear the burden of another, and we would never punish a people until we have sent a messenger to warn them." Quran 17:15. This would mean that punishment does not reach those people who have not received a message of guidance. The subject of evil and philosophical questions around it will be discussed in Chapter 4, and the subject of Islam and science in Chapter 5. The uniformity of our lives and the universe around us may be seen as an overall, cumulative, and decisive proof for the existence of a divine creator with divine attributes. The atheist may object to this by appealing to the claim that human minds are pattern-seeking and need to make sense of their surroundings. As previously mentioned, however, when we observe the mathematical nature of the world around us and everything else, it becomes self-evident that nothing occurs merely by accident. Integrated complexity was the term employed by Antony Flew after he changed his position from atheism to accepting a creator. The complexity of everything is so integrated or intertwined that if any one component malfunctioned, life would not be possible, and even if life were possible, many things that we benefit from would be done away with. To name a few, the 4 seasons and the vegetation resulting in seasonal food which benefits humans and animals, the rising and setting of the sun, the constellations of stars and how they change every 3 months, and their differences in the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere, how in ancient times farmers would use the stars for cultivation, how the stars and winds provide navigation in the oceans, the northern star, the various human languages and human civilizations, the creative achievements human beings can make purely from their brains, the numerous resources that humans and animals alike utilize for their own benefit and sustainability, the medicinal benefits of plants, and how both human beings and animals consume wild shrubs for a cure, and the subsequent development of medicines, fresh, drinkable water, trees with all their various fruits, different fingerprints for every single human being, no two ever the same, the human DNA and the very origins of life, the human mind and consciousness, the deep spiritual lesson of life and unique human experiences. From the rainforests to the deserts, from the mountains to the cities and the various places in between, on an earth that yet remains largely undiscovered, there are signs with those who have eyes that are open, minds that are broad, and hearts that have not been sealed. There are signs in everything we see, from the bees collecting pollen and eating nectar, and flying back to the hive to disgorge the same from their stomachs to produce honey, to their performing a dance of coordinates to inform the other bees of the location of the pollen, not unsimilar to the ant with its huge colonies and methods of communications, or the spider when it weaves its extraordinary web with its geometric patterns, or the different species of silkworms in the mulberry trees, and how humans cultivate them, or how cows eat from a field and chew for hours, to give a milk that carries all the nutrients extracted from that natural habitat. The majority of human life, if viewed in this fashion, reveals a harmony in most things. Where it does not reveal such harmony and uniformity is where you find the atheist objecting to God and his existence. This is the point at which we must turn to the objections and the case made against God, such as why he would permit evil and various other things. 3.20. The names and attributes of Allah. Before concluding this chapter, let us take a look at how everything around us is, in fact, a manifestation of the names of God as known in Islam, and how the Muslim views the world. The absolute perfection of God is limitless, his divine attributes endless, and his divine names eternal. Some of those divine names have been revealed in the Quran and the prophetic traditions. Let us begin with those names which many would be unaware that God has, and yet we observe the manifestations of those names in our daily lives. He is the subduer, al-Qahhar, yet he is also the most merciful, ar-Rahman. He is the withholder, al-Mani', yet he is also the enricher, al-Mughni. He is the avenger, al-Muntaqim, yet he is also the ever-pardoning, at-Tawwab. He is the giver of death, al-Mumit, yet he is also the giver of life, al-Muhyi. He is the judge, al-Hakam, yet he is also the pardoner, al-Afu. He is the compeller, al-Jabbar, yet he is also the most loving, al-Wadud. Notice here that the names of Allah encompass both rigor and beauty, as opposed to the Christian narrative which crumbles when faced with the paradox of evil. All the names of Allah supplement each other and are complementary, although appearing as opposites. A further 20 attributes, necessary in the right of Allah, follow with a succinct proof. Necessary in his right are 1. Existence, wujud. The opposite to this is non-existence, adam. The proof established for it is the very existence of creation, 2. Infinite preexistence, qidam. The opposite to this is contingency, huduth. The proof established for it is that if he were contingent, he would be dependent upon an entity to make him contingent. This is impossible. 3. Eternal, baqa. The opposite to this is cessation, fana. The proof established for it is that if he was prone to cessation, he would be contingent. This is impossible. 4. Opposition to the contingent, al-mukhalafa lil-hawadith. The opposite to this is similitude to the contingent, al-mumathala lil-hawadith. He does not have a hand, eye, ear, or anything from amongst the attributes of contingency. The proof established for it is that if he bore a similarity with that which is contingent, he would be contingent. This is impossible. 5. Self-established, al-qiyam bin-nafs. The opposite to this is dependence, al-ihtiyaj. He is not dependent upon a place or particularization. The proof established for it is that if he was dependent upon a place, he would be an attribute of that place. His existence as an attribute is impossible. Also, if he was dependent upon a being, he would be contingent, and his existence as being contingent is impossible. 6. Oneness, wahdaniyah, in essence, that, attributes, sifat, and actions, af'al. The opposite to this is plurality, ta'addud. Oneness in essence means that his essence is not composed of numerous parts. Oneness in attributes means that he does not possess two attributes or more of the same genus. Similarly, there is no one who possesses an attribute similar to any of his. Oneness in actions means that none other than him possess an action from his actions. The proof established for it is that if he was plural, nothing in creation would have been created. 7. Omnipotence, qudra. This is a pre-eternal attribute established with his divine essence. By it, he brings into existence, and by it takes out of existence. The opposite to this is incapability, ajaz. The proof established for it is that if he was incapable, nothing in creation would exist. 8. Divine will, irada. This is a pre-eternal attribute established with his divine essence. By it, he specifies what is possible, either by bringing it into existence or by taking it out of existence. The opposite to this is compulsion, kiraha. The proof established for it is that if he was compelled to perform an action, he would be incapable. This is impossible. 9. Knowledge, ilm. This is a pre-eternal attribute established with his divine essence. By it he knows things. The opposite to this is ignorance, jahl. The proof established for it is that if he was ignorant, he would not be able to intend anything. This is impossible. 10. Life, haya. This is a pre-eternal attribute established with his divine essence. This attribute substantiates his attribution with knowledge and other attributes. The opposite to this is death, maut. The proof established for it is that if he was dead, he would not be omnipotent, be one who wills, or be one who knows. This is impossible. 11. Hearing, and 12. Sight, as-sam' wal-basar. These are pre-eternal attributes established with his divine essence. By them he unveils existence. Their opposites are deafness and blindness, as-samam wal-a'ma. The proof established for it is his saying, he is the all-hearing and all-seeing. Qur'an 42:11. This is a textual proof which is sufficient for Muslims, and for an atheist, only after he accepts the divine revelation of the Qur'an, such as the following attribute. 13. Divine speech, kalam. This is a pre-eternal attribute established with his divine essence. It is not in the form of letters or sounds. The opposite to this is dumbness, bekem. The proof established for it is his saying, Allah spoke to Moses, Quran 464. It is necessary in his right, his existence as being. 14. Omnipotent, qadir. His existence as being incapable, ajiz. 15. One who wills, murid. The opposite to this is his existence as being compelled, kari. 16. One who knows, alim. The opposite to this is his existence as being ignorant, jahil. 17. Alive, hay. The opposite to this is his existence as being dead, mayyit. 18. All-seeing, and 19. All-hearing, sami' wa basir. Their opposites are his existence as being deaf and blind, asam wa a'ma. 20. One who speaks, mutakellim. The opposite to this is his existence as being dumb, ebkem. Finally, there is one attribute which is permissible in his right: the performance of every possible action or its abandonment. Fi'l kul mumkin wa tarkihi. The proof established for it is that if the performance of an action or its abandonment was necessary upon Allah, the permissible would become necessary or impossible. This is impossible.